So for this project, what you'll want to do is first start out with your sketchbook. And I've got a full page here in my sketchbook filled up with some ideas for my sentence, my thumbnail sketches for my illustrations, and I'll be talking about what colors I'll be using in my illustration. So the first thing is you'll want to decide on a sentence. And I wanted my story to be about a grandchild who was missing their grandparent and wanted to make their favorite soup in their memory. So I had my sentence as the smell of the simmering soup brought back so many happy memories. So I wanted that to go in my image. I was going back and forth between that and a grandchild and the grandparent saying, "I miss Grandpa, me too. Let's make some of his favorite soup." So I was, these two I did that phrase for, and then these two I used this sentence for. So you don't have to choose one sentence for all of them. You could do a couple, but you don't want to do more than two because I think then you don't get to do any variations of the one. So these are the two I kind of narrowed it down to, and then I made the final decision on this one. I wanted my setting to be a cozy kitchen and either a kitchen table or a stove in the foreground. So I've done that here. I have my kitchen table in the foreground in this image and the stove with the soup simmering on it in the foreground in this image. And with this one, I really have most of the image taken up by this kind of swirling soup. This kid who's got his eyes closed while he's smelling this soup and stirring this pot while it's simmering on the stove. So I went forward with this design. I liked this one too, but I thought this one might be a little bit more fun. And I liked that it had that little bit of emotion with the child with his eyes closed, just imagining how good this soup is going to taste. For this, then what I wanted to do is talk about color. So I took some notes on color. I wanted it to be a split complementary color scheme. So I want these cool colors that are kind of analogous in the background. So I chose some colors like this, and I'm using paint chip samples, but you can use a color or a palette app, which I'll talk about next year. You can use colored pencil just to kind of sketch them on the side of your thumbnail sketch here. You could use your acrylic paint if you want to just mix some colors that you're thinking of using, but you want to see what they look like all together. And I want you to do this because, I picked a few colors for the background, these ones. I picked a warm brown, like a chestnut brown for the skin tone, and a nice orange tone for the shirts. I wanted warm colors in the foreground and cool colors in the background. And when I put these together, one thing I noticed is I didn't really like how this green played with the other colors. So I decided to take that out and just use these two greens, like a tone and tint of green for the background. And then I'm going to use this for the pot in the foreground. So I really liked how these colors played together. And when you use an app or put them all down next to one another, you can see right away if they're going to play nicely together. Another thing I might do is make this a little bit more red than yellow in its base when I mix it up. So with this color scheme, what I wanted was cool analogous colors in the background and then warmer colors in the foreground just to pop my character forward. And then I wanted a neutral color for the pot and not too dark so it didn't sink your eye there. So I chose this nice middle value gray. I like using complementary colors because they add a little bit of excitement to my image, but I didn't want them to be full saturation complementary colors. I didn't want to go with pure orange, green, and blue because that would be way too intense for the feel of this scene. So again, I chose to go with tones of reddish orange and tints and tones of my greens and a nice tone of blue to create that gray. So that's creating that split complementary color scheme in this image. I also am paying a lot of attention to where I'm putting my text. You don't want to just throw in your text at the end willy-nilly because then it might not fit with your design. I'm having mine go up here because I want this to be this kind of lightish gray-green behind here with the steam lines, which I'll make in white, going over the top, so it won't be super high contrast, so you'll still be able to read the text over it if I have the text in the darker color. If I had that as a dark blue background and very light steam from the soup and tried to put black text over it, you wouldn't be able to read it on the blue background and it would be too high contrast. So that's really something you'll want to think about. With this image, I was thinking about having the table in the foreground of these two figures and then putting the text over the table, which wouldn't have any visual distractions. So you're really going to have to think about how long is your text and where it's going to fit in these images. Another tool you can use to create a color scheme is this Pocket Palette app. And it's a really nice app and it's very easy to use. So each time you create a color scheme, you're going to want to press that plus in the corner. And then you see 3 colors come up. The first thing you want to do is switch the way you are going to adjust your colors. So this hex stands for the hex code, so that's a graphic design term. If you know the number in Photoshop of your exact color. RGB stands for red, green, and blue, so you can adjust those, but I find that's a little bit harder to use. I like to use this hue, saturation, and brightness. So this is your saturation down here. This is your hue, so you can slide it. I like to start with the hue first because it's the easiest thing to do, and then adjust the saturation, and then the brightness. So you can have a really dark, muted purple by just bringing down the saturation and the brightness, so it kind of creates a tone. You can adjust each of your colors. So say I wanted a couple different purples here. Maybe I wanted this one leaning a little bit more red and a little bit more saturated, and then I wanted a green that was darker to match that. You have your color scheme up there, and then you can add colors to this, so you're not just stuck with 3 by just adding colors, and then you can adjust those as well. So the handy thing about this tool is you kind of already have an idea of how to mix the color just by how you utilize the color. You can tell what the parent hue is. So this one, if you go to full saturation, is, here on your color wheel, or here, you can drag it around, and then when you adjust it, you can see how it looks in real time. So that's a really fun tool to use. And I like it because you can see what all the colors look like together, and it can tell you if there's a color that's really an outlier in your color scheme. If you are using this as your tool, you can either screenshot it by just screenshotting it in your phone, or any other kind of way you can capture this image, but this is what you would upload with your notes. The next step of our process is to sketch out our drawing full scale in our sketchbook, and I'm not using a whole page. I'm actually doing this on an 8.5 by 11 inch sheet, so I'm measuring this down, and I'll tell you why that is in a second. First off, it is because it is exactly the size of a sheet of printer paper, which we're going to use to create templates to cut out our image. The second reason is we want it to be a little bit smaller than our entire sheet of sketchbook paper, so that when we go to paint our sheets of paper to use on the backdrop, that we don't have to go right up to the edge, that if it's not perfect at the edge, we can still cut in from that. Now, when you're making your paper sheets to cut out for this illustration, you're really going to want to think about the order that they'll go down. For example, with this image, I want a big sheet to go in the whole background of this area behind my main character. And I don't want to have to cut it out around here. I just want to have to, have one big square that I put everything else on top of, so I don't have to cut around anything. So I am going to use a full sheet of paper for that. When I paint on this whole paper, the backdrop color, I want to make sure it's totally full so that I can just layer everything else on top of it. So that's why I have this sheet of paper just a little bit wider than the actual image that we're making, so that if the paint doesn't go all the way to the edge, you can cut it off. Additionally, you'll have to think of how many sheets of paper you'll have to cut for each element, or to create. So something like the face here, I might not need a large sheet of paper for. I might be able to get away with a smaller area of color or something like the oven mitt. I don't need a giant sheet like this. I can do a smaller area like this as long as it fits under, or it fits around that oven mitt. Now you might want to create a little bit extra if you're like me and you make mistakes occasionally. You might want to do something double that size, so if you make a mistake on one, you can create another right away without having to mix your paint again. So now I'm ready to mix my acrylic paint, which I'm doing here, and I'm going to paint it down on my mixed media paper and use my color samples or my color wheel to match and create the exact colors I want. When I do this, I'm leaving a little bit of texture in certain areas, but you can choose to have it be textured or slightly flat. And then other areas I can even add additional texture, like for the hair. So our next step is going to be to flatten our paper, because obviously a warped sheet of paper is not going to be great for collaging. So the first thing I'm going to do is get some scrap sheets of computer paper or notebook paper that I can layer in between it, and then a heavy book like this one that's larger than my sheet of paper. You'll also want to have some clean water and a large brush or sponge to use to do this. A sponge is a little bit easier than a brush, but I'm going to show a brush just in case you don't have a sponge at home. So again, I'm going to just saturate lightly. I don't want it to be like dripping off of the edge or anything. I just want to get the whole back side of the paper moistened so it's not pooling water or anything. So it's nice and even. I can look at it from the side just to make sure I'm not missing any big spots. I'm getting right up to the edges. You can put your hand on this, it's not going to hurt anything. And then when I lay it down, normally I wouldn't do it right where I'm working because there's a little bit of wetness on here, but just for this demo's purpose I'm going to flip it up. And you want something non-porous underneath these as they're drying overnight. I'm going to put my scrap sheets of paper on it like this. You could even put like some scrap cardboard or something to that effect. You know, some old cereal boxes that you cut open underneath these just to keep your surface from getting damaged. You don't want to put it like right on a wood table or anything. So I'm just going to press that down a little bit and then lay my super heavy book over the top of it. Just make sure as I'm feeling the edges that there's no areas that are kind of popping up. So you don't want the edges to be kind of halfway under it. You want it fully underneath there. And if you have not so heavy of a book but a wide enough book, you can always add some heavier stuff on top of it, just as long as the book that's touching the paper is going to cover that whole surface. Now I'm going to layer the other ones on top of this as I finish, so I'll pull the book up, add the next layer, and put it back down. And I'm gonna, you can layer 4 or 5 of these on top of one another, but after that you'll probably want to get a different area as well. But if you leave this overnight, your paper is going to be completely flat and ready to collage by the morning. So the next step of the process, you're going to take your drawing. You can either cut it out or leave it on the full page, and then you're going to take a sheet of paper, computer paper, something that's nice and thin, and you are going to take it over to a window, tape it all together with just some of your drafting tape in a few places. Take it to your window and trace over your drawing with pencil. And you're going to do this to create a template. So take it up to the window, trace over the whole drawing, and create your template. And that's what we're going to use to cut out the shapes. Now that I've got my template made, this is what I'm going to use to cut out shapes so that I can use them as templates for my papers. And you can see my papers are nice and flat. I'll show you these sheets here. They don't have any buckles in them, and they're going to be perfect for cutting. And that's because I left them overnight, waited after dampening them. So you'll want your paper nice and flat for this. And I have a bunch of different colors here to choose from that I mixed up for this. The other things you'll want for this step are X-Acto knife if you have one, a cutting surface, or you can just use the back of your sketchbook to cut on. That's fine as well. You'll want your glue stick, and again, I recommend these Yoo-Hoo glue sticks, and that's just because they're nice and permanent. They make them in a big size and a really small size too. You'll want some scissors, and I just have 2 sizes here for me personally, because that's what I like to use, and your pencil if you need it. So that's what we'll be using next to cut out our sheets. And when I do this, what I'm going to do is just think about the order I'm going to put this down in. So for this drawing, I'm really first going to put down my backdrop because everything else gets layered on top of that. So for this, I have my backdrop sheet over here. And what I'm going to do is for mine, since it's so behind all of the rest of the piece, you know, it goes all the way down here, just for stability, I'm just going to cut out this size sheet of the background paper and just put everything on top instead of just kind of having it be partially behind here. I'm just going to have it be behind the whole thing. The next step I might do is the next step after that, which might be the skin tone on my boy that I've got in my illustration. Then I might cut out the hair because that will go over the top. And I have to think about the shape of things. So when I'm cutting out this head, I might cut it out a little bit, you know, taller than it is here, just so that when I cut out the hair, I have something to glue it to. So you'll have to think about those things in the order. Also, I might cut out the head separate from the neck and glue the neck onto the bottom later on. So I might make it a little bit larger. Same thing with the shirt. I might have the neck go down a little bit further so that the shirt can glue right onto the neck. And I'll show you that in a second as I get these cut out. But first, I'm just going to cut out some of these for you so you can see what I'm talking about. And when I'm cutting, you can also use little pieces of this tape just to tack things into place. This drafting tape is really nice because it doesn't damage the surface if you use it gently and lightly. So don't kind of press it into the surface too hard, but if you use it nice and lightly, it typically comes off pretty easily. So I'm just going to use this as a template to cut out my backdrop. And there's my backdrop. And so for my template, to get it to look how I want it to look, I am going to be cutting it out first on my template. Like if I just tried to trace this onto my paper, the thing that would happen is pencil marks would get on here, and that's what we don't want to happen with our illustrations. So I'm just going to hold this on while I cut it, but you're welcome to, if you're nervous about holding it, just tack it on with tape in a few places as well. And when I cut these, I don't want to cut them like right in the middle of here, especially if I'm kind of nervous about putting it together, because if you make a mistake, what happens is then you can't cut another one out. So I tend to cut these kind of closer to the edge so that I maximize my space if I make a mistake, which happens sometimes. And again, this is the head underneath the hair, and I'm actually going to trim a little bit of that hair or that top of the head off as I go. Okay, and then I'm just going to kind of eyeball this and do it just a little bit farther than where the hairline is going to come, just so there's an area to glue, but it doesn't go behind the whole hair there. Okay, so, and then my hair is next. So again, for this, I'm going to cut my template up. This is going to be the exact shape I want my hair. And again, I'm not going to do it right in the middle. I'm going to do it off to the side. And you can see I have this really nice texture on here. And that's because I just wanted a little bit of variation with that hair so that it could be nice and fun to illustrate. Okay, so there's my head and my hair. You can tell that's looking really fun and the colors are working nicely together. That's what doing all that extra planning helps you to do. Helps you to kind of make sure you're visualizing everything before you get it together on the paper. Okay, my next step with this one is, because these facial elements I'm going to actually draw these on with colored pencil, I'm going to work on the neck next. So there's my piece for the neck, and remember, because I need it to go underneath the head and underneath the shirt collar, I am going to make that just a little bit longer and wider because the shirt and the head will kind of cover up part of that. So when I cut that out, I'm going to be considering that. And if you get confused about pieces, if you want to label them too, just in case you're kind of working on this here and there, you can always put them labels on them as well. Next, don't forget some of those details. I've got to do the little ears on the side, so I'm going to do those next. And for those, I'm just going to kind of eyeball those because I know generally the shape, but you can use your drawing too if you feel not comfortable eyeballing those as well. So once I get the first few forms cut out, then I'm going to work on the rest of my image. And I'm generally going to work from background to foreground and really be thinking about how my pieces are going to be layered and structured once I start to glue them together. Again, at this point, you're not going to want to glue things together just yet, just in case you have to move anything around or adjust anything. So now that you've got your pieces all cut out and loose, what you are going to do is start gluing them first together and then to the backdrop. And we don't glue it right away again, because in case if you run out of paper for something or you mess something up, you still have a little bit of an ability to move things around. Now, when I'm doing this, I do want to have my template or my original drawing nearby. Our cut up template is all cut up and off to the side, hopefully at this point. And for this, you're going to be adding the small details later, so after everything's all glued down. And then anything that you are putting on text-wise, we're going to put on digitally, so don't write your text on there either. Another thing you're going to want to do is have a scrap sheet of paper, so that if you're gluing something, say I'm gluing a shape like this, I don't want to have it, gluing it right over here, and I don't want to glue it, on my cutting board either. I want to kind of work from the top left of this to the bottom right and move my pieces around. And I use a scrap paper so that if I do get excess glue on my surface, then it's going to stay there. And then I can pretend I'm putting this down on my piece. Put it down here. The thing you're going to want to avoid is, say I just glued that piece down. If I glue another piece right over the top of it, it's actually going to pick some of that glue up that I just put down, and it's going to get on the surface and cause a weird sheen, which is going to show up in your design. So once you kind of use one area to glue, apply glue, move to another, and then move to another and another. So you're not re-gluing over the same area and gunking up your pieces. So now I will glue all of my pieces together, being very careful that they line up with my template. So you can see I've got my template underneath here once I'm kind of assembling things, and that's just to make sure that nothing is way out of place in my design. So use your backdrop or your drawing as a template to assemble your pieces together and as a visual guide as you're gluing everything down. So now I'm going to take some colored pencils and get some of these last areas of detail, like the facial features, some of the lines in the hand, maybe some lines in here, and I'm still deciding yet whether I want to have these be in colored pencils or to make a lighter green for the steam. So I'll decide that as I go. So I'm going to have this here as a guide just so I can kind of see where things are placed. And I'm using colored pencils that make sense with my design. So I'm not going to use all black to go with my design. I'm actually going to use colors that make sense. So for his hand, for example, I'm going to use darker brown to put in some of those marks Now you could do this with colored pencil or with paint. It's totally up to you. I just like colored pencil personally because I feel like I have a little bit more control over it, but it's really up to you. You can also use cut paper for some of these. So say you wanted to use cut paper to make these little features, you could definitely do that and just go cut them out really small and glue them down just like you did the rest of the image. And if you do make a mistake using colored pencil, you can erase off very lightly. You don't want to erase too hard because you can damage the paint surface, but say you need to clean up a little area or you went a little bit too hard in an area, you can go back in there with an eraser. Okay, I'm pretty happy with this as it is. I'm going to think about adding those swirl lines and then we'll get into photographing the work. So the next thing I want to do is photograph my piece, and I'm doing this during the daytime because I think this is going to give the best light. And I have a window to one side casting light down. You can see there's a shadow, and I'm taking it on the floor, so I'm taking it right above my image, and then I'm using this sheet of white paper just to kind of reflect light back onto it. And I'm actually going to take it the other way just to fill the frame. So I would take my picture as square as I can, adjusting this piece of paper on the side just to bounce the light as best I can. So once you edit your image in the Snapseed app and have it ready to go to add the text to it, you're going to use one of these two apps. The first is Fonto, so Phonto, and then the second is Add Text. So you can choose either one of these, but the Fonto app is available on both Android and iOS, whereas the Add Text app is just available on iOS. This one's actually got a little bit more functionality, but because this one is available on both platforms, I'm going to use this one. So the first thing you're going to do when you open the app is it will give you a prompt to open your image, and so you'll find it on your device, and then you can click anywhere within your image to start adding your text. So you click that and then add your text. I have my text already copied and pasted, so I can put it in nice and easily. And then I want it to kind of have one line of text and then a second, have it broken up. So I'm actually going to press the return button so that this part is on a separate line than this. You can also align it left, center, or right, and you'll see how that pans out. But I'm going to, when I go back to the image, but I'm going to align it left. So I'm done adding my text, and I'm just going to kind of move it around. Like it might be a different size than this when you first upload it. Might be really small, might be too large and going off the edge of there, but you'll be able to adjust it to fit on your illustration. So I added my text already. Now I'm going to choose a font. I've already chosen this font. It's a Helvetica font. And what I want to do is just show you some things to avoid. So what I like about this font is that it's easy to read. It is a sans serif font, so it doesn't have those notches at the end of the letter forms, and it's super legible for young kids. So something like this one, even this version of it, is not going to be very legible. It's a very, it shows up very weakly on here. So I'm going to go back in and choose a different one as well, kind of more funky font. So this Henny Penny font. Like this one might be really fun for maybe a title on a page, but if you're using it for the main text in an image, again, it's going to be pretty hard for really young kids to read. So I want these to have a font that's just fairly plain. So I'm going to go back to this one I've already had chosen. This one's super easy to read and nice and bold. The next thing you will do is you can adjust the size. And you could do that by choosing your size, oopsies, and going up or down, but you'll have to just kind of guesstimate based on the proportions. So I'm happy with the size. And then the style is the last thing. This adjusts the color. I already made this color, which is a grayish green, to kind of look like a shade of the background color. But just by sliding these, you can really adjust the proportions of your color. So I'm going to do that. And it's a little bit bigger just in the preview so you can see what it looks like. I'm going to press done. And I'm pretty happy with it. I might just up the size very slightly. Last thing I want to show you is how to move it. So I can just click within here and move it around. You can also add other areas of text too, just by clicking on there, a different part of the image, and the same box will pop up. There's also a few other features. So you can curve the text, you can make it 3D, you can trash it, and just start over again if you want, or tilt it. I don't recommend doing any kind of tilting or curving, just because, again, that makes it harder for young kids to read. So once I am done, I'll kind of click off of my workspace here just so I can see the whole image. And then once I'm happy with where my text placement is, the color of it, the size of it, and the font I'm using, I'm going to export it just by clicking that button down there, and it will download right to my camera as an image. So then you'll be able to upload it anywhere you need to upload it.